Chapter 51. Breaking Feihong. These black-robed men were all tall and muscular. Their black robes covered their entire bodies and their heads, making it impossible to see their appearances. However, the occasional cold gaze from within the black robe caused the hearts of the surrounding scavengers and desperados to tremble. The gazes of these black-robed men carried indifference to life. They didn't have the slightest hint of humanity in them, as though they were just machines used for killing. Even as they stood there, the heat of June was also dispersed by an invisible force, causing the atmosphere outside the general store to be extremely cold. As for their identities, the moment Xu Qing arrived, he already knew from the whispers of the scavengers in the surroundings. It's the law enforcement team of the Lichu sect. Lichu sect, that's a bunch of lunatics. They rarely appear in scavenger camps. Why are they here this time? I heard they're here to find someone. They have already searched through all the cities and scavenger campsites in this area. As the sounds from the surroundings entered Xu Qing's ears, his eyes slowly narrowed. With a flip of his hand, an iron stick appeared, and he stared coldly at the general store. At the same time, 3 people walked out of the general store. 2 people were in front, 1 tall and 1 short. The tall man's figure was tall and straight, like a sharp sword that was stained with blood. His clothes were the exact opposite of the law enforcement team from the Lichu sect. His robe was blood-colored and the sun pattern on it was black. At that moment, his head wasn't covered, revealing a head of black hair and a well-defined face. It was a youth. The instant he walked out, everyone from the black-clothed law enforcement team outside lowered their heads and knelt on one knee. Upon seeing this scene, Xu Qing's eyes narrowed. The aura emitted by the other party made him feel as though he had encountered a powerful ferocious beast in the depths of the jungle. As for the shorter one beside the youth, it was the little girl. At that moment, an unprecedentedly happy smile appeared on her face. She forcefully grabbed the youth's hand. From his age, it seemed that the other party was her older brother. The coldness on the youth's body also became incomparably gentle when he lowered his head to look at the little girl. However, the sadness in his eyes that was difficult to melt was still very obvious. It was as though he was reminiscing about his loved ones who had passed away during the calamity. Behind them was the boss of the general store. He had a flattering look on his face as he carefully followed them and whispered. Looking at all of this, Xu Qing silently put away the iron stick. He then touched the small stone in his leather pouch, feeling a little hesitant. At the same time, the little girl who walked out of the shop also saw Xu Qing in the crowd. She hurriedly said a few words to the youth beside her. After that, when the youth's scrutinizing gaze landed on Xu Qing, the little girl let go and ran toward him. The scavengers beside Xu Qing instinctively retreated, allowing the little girl to successfully reach Xu Qing and bid him farewell. "My brother is here to pick me up. Brother kid, do you want to leave with me?" During this farewell, the little girl looked at Xu Qing with some anticipation. Xu Qing shook his head. After receiving the answer, the little girl felt a little disappointed. She glanced at Xu Qing before revealing a smile again. "It's fine. When I grow up, we can still meet." "Brother kid, I said that I would repay you for saving my life. I will definitely do it. I'm leaving with my brother. My brother is very good to me. He gives me whatever I want. Do you have a brother too?" The little girl had a lot to say as she spoke. The youth outside the general store called out to her. "I'm leaving, brother kid." The little girl looked at Xu Qing. During these 2 months at the campsite, the only person she was familiar with was the person in front of her. At that moment, she felt a little reluctant to part with him. Xu Qing glanced at the little girl and took out a small 7-colored stone from his leather pouch, passing it to her. "This stone can remove scars. I'm giving it to you." The little girl was stunned. She held the stone and looked at Xu Qing, wanting to say something but hesitating. Her brother then called out again. In the end, the little girl cast a deep glance at Xu Qing and held the 7-colored stone in her hand. She then returned to the youth's side and left amidst the crowd of black-robed people. On the way, she turned her head once and waved at Xu Qing. Xu Qing also waved his hand and watched as the little girl, who always had a happy smile on her face, walked away. He felt that it was right for her to leave this place. "I wish you peace." After saying that, Xu Qing turned and walked toward his residence. Life was the same as before. He silently cooked, ate, cleaned, meditated, and attended lessons. Time flowed by and 7 days passed like this. Xu Qing had completely returned to his slum-like state. He also realized that Grandmother Bai wouldn't be staying at the campsite for long. This was something that Xu Qing had guessed after Grandmother Bai's convoy had started organizing in the past 2 to 3 days. Grandmother Bai had once told him that he came from Purple Earth. Xu Qing had heard many people mention that it was the center of the Nanhuang continent. On that morning, when Xu Qing arrived at Grandmother Bai's tent, he didn't see any guards, nor did he see Chen Feiyuan or Tingyu. In the tent, there was only Grandmother Bai. Xu Qing already had an answer in his heart. During this lesson, Grandmother Bai's lecture was very detailed. Xu Qing listened attentively, but time still flowed quickly. Very soon, it was time for the lesson to end. Looking at the silent Xu Qing, Grandmother Bai sighed softly. "I'm leaving. Before I leave, I'll impart to you some knowledge that will truly help you in your future life. Due to the restrictions of the oath, I can't tell you directly. Whether you can grasp it or not will depend on you." Grandmother Bai cast a deep glance at Xu Qing. Xu Qing's eyes narrowed as he looked at Grandmother Bai. The moment their gazes met, Grandmother Bai's weak voice echoed in the tent. "Kid, take the herbs I taught you on the 3rd day, the 7th day, the 11th day, the 15th day, the 17th day, and the 19th day, and put them together in the ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. Add the equivalent amount of 7-leaf grass, and you will be able to refine the white pills that countless people in this world need, which can be converted to spirit coins." The moment he said this, Xu Qing's eyes widened and his breathing became hurried. At that moment, it wasn't like before when he didn't understand herbs. After almost 2 months of attending classes, he was very clear about the value of pill formulas in this world. That was an extremely precious resource in the hands of a large family or faction. This was especially so for the white pills that belonged to the category of basic hard currency. The value of the pill formula was so great that it was hard to describe. It couldn't be easily leaked. Now that he had grasped the method to make white pills, he didn't even need a high cultivation base. With this pill formula, he could live very well. This was a great kindness. Xu Qing's body trembled slightly as he looked at Grandmother Bai in front of him. He then looked at the white hair on Grandmother Bai's temples and his gentle gaze. The scenes from the past 2 months surfaced in his mind. From eavesdropping outside the tent to listening to the lesson in the tent. The other party's earnest teachings caused the thousands of words in his heart to transform into deep gratitude and reluctance. Finally, he lowered his head and bowed deeply to the seemingly stern but amiable old man. "Thank you, teacher." If it could be said that Captain Lei gave him the feeling of family, then this Grandmother Bai in front of him was like a master, giving him an extremely important survival skill in this world. Grandmother Bai looked at Xu Qing's Bai and a smile appeared on his face. He also noticed Xu Qing's emotions and thus smiled. "Kid, I'm treating you like this because you're good at learning and have a good comprehension ability. I love those people in this world who have set rules that they can't divulge their pill recipes. However, there are times when my identity gives me no choice. However, you're not the first person I've taught the Tao of alchemy and pill formulas to. I have traveled to the southern Phoenix and imparted many things to many people. The Tao of alchemy of our human race cannot decline because of the status barrier. Finally, between us you have to know that the world is the guest house of all living beings. Time is a passerby from ancient times to now. As long as you don't die, we will meet again. I hope that the day I see you again will be the day you would have made use of your talent." Grandmother Bai's words were filled with deep meaning, especially the last part. It was the most profound sentence Xu Qing had heard in all these years. He firmly remembered it. On the same day, Grandmother Bai's convoy left. Before they left, Grandmother Bai left a thick herbal medicine book for Xu Qing to self-study. Xu Qing sent them all the way to the outside of the campsite and stared blankly at the departing convoy. He also saw Tingyu's figure in the convoy, constantly turning her head to look at him. In the dusk, they drifted further and further away. Under the setting sun, the youth's shadow was very long. He stood there for a very long time before slowly turning around and returning to the campsite. The campsite wouldn't be different because of the departure of a few people. There were no changes, it was still dirty. There were still all kinds of people from all walks of life. There were the shouts of old people, the cries of children, the laughter of burly men, and the low panting of women. Under the setting sun, the myriad of lights seemed to have transformed into a miniature version of the campsite. Xu Qing walked among them, but didn't return to his residence immediately. Instead, he unknowingly walked to the general store and looked at the new assistant who had taken over as the little girl. He then bought a bottle of wine. After Xu Qing returned to his residence with the alcohol, he didn't eat that night. He looked at the empty room and sat there with his head lowered, staring at the alcohol flask. After a long while, he picked it up and took a big gulp. As the spiciness flowed down his throat and into his stomach, it exploded and spread throughout his body. Xu Qing suddenly felt that this wine, which wasn't very delicious back then, seemed to have some flavor today. Hence, he took another sip. In his slightly tipsy mind, the scenes from the past 6 years in the slum surfaced. The image of Captain Lei's figure walking into the city gate, Grandmother Bei's departing combat, and the scene of the little girl walking far away appeared. The words the other party said before he left also surfaced. "Do you have a brother too? I also have an elder brother, but I can't find him." Xu Qing held the alcohol flask and leaned against the wall. He lifted his head and looked at the moon outside as he mumbled softly. Outside his room, the purple-robed old man and his servant stood there and listened quietly until the youth's murmur rang out from within the room. "The world is the guest house of all living beings. Time is a passerby from ancient times until now. As long as I don't die, we will meet again."